within their sector. So within the business area, Raja Sosa and Paul are co-chairing it. Annie and Catherine are involved in it, and then there's a bunch of different sub-working groups in that. Same with the nonprofit community. The whole idea is for us to push information down from the Emergency Operations Center, which we stood up on March 17th. I'm part of the unified command of that. So it's for us to push information down so people understand, what the latest is, and then for information to come up about, major issues or concerns that we need to start to track and try to address at the Emergency Operations Center. When I made that comment before, if your plan is somebody else going to save you, you don't have a plan. That's not to say that we're not busting our tails trying to get money from the county or get money from the state or whatever we can to help with economic development or mental health or physical health here in Evanston. We're trying, but just like you all, we have certain challenges. And so one of those, when it comes to the money side of things, is the feds in the CARES Act that they created set aside $150 billion for local governments, but capped it at local governments over 500,000 people. Obviously, that leaves out the vast majority of local governments because they're under 500,000 people. But it means the state has some money, the county has some money. There's some real restrictions that the U.S. Treasury put on that money. Initially, they thought they could use that money to cover revenue loss. And Treasury was very clear, you cannot. It has to be COVID-19 related. And so, I am spending a lot of time on the phone with legislators and others trying to make the case, don't keep all the money to yourself, try to send some down to us. Congress is working on another potential allocation. I'm not holding my breath on that one. I don't think it's going to come anytime quick. And so we're all looking for either some kind of relief or anything like that. I know that this is a painful time for everybody. There is nobody that's unaffected by this, but we all know that there are people that are more adversely affected than others. My hope in this meeting, or expectation in this meeting, is to get a real good understanding of how this event is affecting each of you. B, understanding, recognizing that no one is unaffected by this, and that no one is going to be made whole from this recovery. That we're all in this together. We need to help one another to the extent that we can. And, I'm interested to hear about, what kind of help that you've been able to provide, okay, to the extent that you can, your tenants through this really difficult time. I think we'd all agree, you are critical to Evanston, right? You're major property owners here. You have residents in those properties, or you have businesses in those properties. Many of those businesses create the essence of Evanston, and we don't want to lose that. None of us want to lose it, because if we lose it, if we think about businesses here, retail level, restaurant level businesses that create the essence of Evanston, if they go under, it's bad for all of us. All right, it's bad for the city. We don't have the tax revenue. It's bad for the landlords because you don't have the rental revenue, and it potentially gets really bad if it drives our property values down. So I have a request of all of you, and that request, I think some of you are already fulfilling it and sort of working on this just as good, sort of empathetic, business owners, is, to work with your tenants, these smaller businesses that, again, people know about them. They don't know Haggerty Consulting, we're on the second floor and we do this work all around the country, for instance. They don't know who owns these buildings like Paul and Annie and Catherine do, but they know, those stores that are on the ground level. And we've seen some of them already go out of business or shutter. And we know that's obviously not good for you. But again, we're all in this together. And my expectation is that you will work with those tenants to try and help them through this as well, so that we all survive. Again, recognizing that no one's made whole in this disaster. If somebody points out somebody that's been completely whole, I'll be surprised. Even my business, I'm in the business of emergency management. We help governments respond to, prepare for, respond to, and recover from disasters. That's what we do. And even we have uncertainty in our business, even though we're busy working the disaster around the country in New York City and Florida and California and other places. We have had other projects come to a complete halt. I doubt that they'll even resume again. And it was a lot of money. And so we had some people that are on the beach and not charging to a client because they were set aside for working on that project, and we're trying to direct them to new projects. So even I think that some of those businesses that you look at and say, oh well, they're going to do okay. Even some of them, again, have had an abrupt change to sort of their business. So I do feel for you all, and I do hope you all recognize again that we're all in this, and that we're going to work as a city as hard as we can to try and get some aid from the county or the state, and if we have any locally, again, we're challenged because our revenues are way down as well. But to make them available to try and help the small businesses here in town. So anyway, I'm looking forward to the conversation. I'm gonna listen in and take some notes and follow up with Paul. So thank you, Paul. A few minutes there.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Something I don't believe the mayor mentioned, and Roger Sosa's on the phone, the Evanston Chamber of Commerce. The mayor has put together a series of task forces, and one of them is a business task force. Roger, would you mind just really briefly?
Something happened here. You're muted, Paul.
Yeah, somehow I muted. I asked Roger if he could just briefly touch on the 3 topic areas of the business task force.
Yes, we will. Thanks a lot, Paul. Thanks a lot for everybody for participating today. The mayor asked us to put together a business working group as part of his task force. We've been focused primarily on 3 areas. We were focused on advocacy early on, trying to make sure that the elected officials had an idea of the kinds of needs that we had in the community and that what our businesses needed. We spent a lot of time trying to make an impact on the legislative process, and then understand the outputs of that, the PPP loans and things like that, and communicating all of that to our members, trying to make sure they were well educated on what their options were financially here within this disaster. So what we have done, we've been working on that. We kind of feel that area now has sort of kind of been paused. Those loans are out there. People have applied. They've either gotten them or they haven't gotten them. And now we're focused very much on the recovery aspect of this and where we go from here. And our goal is to provide through a lot of different kinds of resources, online classes, a partnership with Northwestern, among a couple of things that we're looking at, to provide support and technical resources for the businesses to get themselves back on their feet and get them going again. So really, we're focused on a lot of your tenants. And what we're trying to do is make sure that they come back in a way that's safe and sustainable so that they stay in business and they stay profitable. That's what we're looking for, is how do we help all of those groups really find their footing again, pivot, and move forward. And that will hopefully help stabilize a lot of what we see going on right now. But that's been the focus of the group.
All right, thanks, Roger. We've met with retailers, merchants. We've met with restaurants, and we've had in a similar way, by the way, we're doing these roundtables online. And then we met with some professional services businesses. I kind of feel like we saved the best for last. We'll also talk with hotels as well, but it'll be a different format. So, it's really important you as property owners provide the canvas for all of our business to succeed. And literally by providing space for them. And the mayor talked about how our small businesses are the essence of the community. And I think he's right. I think people think about living in Evanston, nice housing, lakefront. They like the businesses, they like the trains, things like that. And you're a huge part of that. So we wanted to check in with you to really see how things are going. And so kind of the rules of engagement today. If you want to speak, unmute yourself or raise your hand, and I'll try to unmute you. And I'll call on people to kind of kick conversations off. I don't have, I don't really have an agenda. I do have an agenda, but I don't have an agenda, so to speak. I want to hear from you, again, because it's critical that you're able to pay your debt service and able to make sure that our businesses are thriving. So I want to, can I call you out at the moment? Call you on you first. Kent Swanson's an Evanston resident. For those who don't know him, by the way, we have like 20 people on the call. So if you want to click in the upper right-hand corner to see who's on the call, a lot of people aren't labeled. But that's one way to see who else is on. But Kent's an Evanston resident, cares about the town, and also has, kind of I think of Kent as more of a macro guy in terms of how he can participate on this call as a downtown loop developer. But what are you seeing in the loop, and how does it apply in Evanston? I'm thinking about technologies and how do we reopen, what kind of retrofits do we need? Those are the types of things I kind of want to talk about right at this moment. And then I've got some other ideas too.
Well, just to give a little further background, our main property that we've recently built is 150 North Riverside, where William Blair's offices and actually Hyatt Corporation's headquarters are. And you think of Hyatt Corporation, they've undergone tremendous stress. They've just laid off, as announced, 350 people just this yesterday, and they've had temporary furloughs of larger numbers, and but they're still a going concern, and they're paying their rent, and so that those things have been going positively. I think that from an office building with retail at the base, our retailers are closed, and our building occupancy is about 1% of what it would be normally. There's typically about 4,000 to 5,000 people in a 1 million plus square foot building, and we right now typically have about 100 people a day in the buildings. Our buildings are open, but they're being only staffed by essential services type people that enable the work from home for others. We are preparing to open the building. I could share with Paul, and he could kind of share with others if that's appropriate. We've been working hard on some of our analyzing how to open buildings properly and then safely. We have the advantage of direct dispatch elevators in kind of this newer building, which enables you to limit the number of people on an elevator, for example. We're implementing a thermal scan technology in the lobby that can pick out someone who has a fever over a standard. The CDC standard is 100.4. And if they're above that standard, then they cannot enter the building. And so there's an array of things in that area. We're increasing touchless systems. We already had touchless water and toilet operation, but you can do more doors touchless, put in hospital style foot pedals and things of that nature. And we're looking at changing some things in our HVAC systems to kind of put in, it's essentially a virus killing system. It's using electricity to wipe out microscopic virus and biologic particles. It's called bipolar ionization that can be retrofitted into buildings. So those are the kind of things that we're doing, trying to stay in front of it. A lot of our tenants are then putting in partitions and other things to, kind of create more separation. They're changing the operation of their kitchenettes and their spaces. So there's a lot of tenant-based things that we don't get into as the landlord because the tenant controls their space. Paul, anything else you'd like me to highlight on kind of from a downtown office perspective?
Well, I think that's helpful. I invited Will Flat's on the line. He's converting 820 Davis.
Sure. Will and I have worked together on a couple other things too. So yeah.
So I think the things you shared are pretty relevant for what Will's working on. I invited Golub and his team. I don't know if anybody's on the line for 1603 Orrington. Will, do you have any thoughts on that? And then we'll kind of get to a broader discussion about kind of our storefront or our street level storefront kinds of spaces.
No, I think, look, I would say that the budget that Ken has for his downtown building is different than the budget that an average office owner in Evanston is going to have.
Yes.
And so the challenge of bipolar ionization to the HVAC system is going to be, different. I would say that I do have the benefit of sitting on the board of a REIT that is national based, and I would say I think there are two different approaches. Some people are taking the very managed approach of saying X number of people per elevator, really queuing in the lobby. Some people are even saying only 25% of the workforce can come back to a particular building. Other national groups are taking a more personal responsibility group, which is probably where I fall into, is to say, we're going to put up good reminders. We're going to put up obviously sanitation stations, and rely on the judgment of the tenants in terms of their social distancing and what they do in the building. But certainly I think there's a combination of both operational and permanent structural changes that can be put in place.
All right, thank you. Al Belmonte, can I pick on you for a quick second? Just click on your red microphone button to unmute yourself. There you go. Thank you. So I'm thinking how we transition. We talked kind of like macro, like larger offices, and you're a guy who has, and amongst others, I just happen to see you in the tile here, who has quite a few storefront spaces, and I know you're working with your tenants. Can you give kind of a general outline of what you're hearing from some of your tenants, and what do you think? And Andy Spatz will have something to say about this too, but we on staff, city staff, and Annie and Catherine Gotzik and the merchant district leaders, we're concerned about how people access spaces and making them feel safe. And, is there a need for, some kind of intervention or funding to help with retrofitting? Like, remember the facade programs. Are there ways that we can help with retrofitting doors and things like that so things become touchless? But so there's that aspect. And also, what are you hearing from your tenants in terms of are they paying rent? Just give us an update on how things are going.
And the scale that I deal with is considerably different than the previous two speakers. I think, we're dealing with very small businesses. At best, some are marginally capitalized. Let me put it that way. So their concerns right now aren't even at the point of retrofitting their spaces so much as it is, what are they going to do to reopen, if they reopen? The short answer to your question, are they paying their rent? Some are trying, some just simply can't, and that's going to be a fact going forward until they're able to reopen. And even beyond that, when they do reopen, there's a lot of concern as to what they can expect when they do reopen. Some won't be able to reopen clearly with the capacity that they previously had 60 days ago. So their cash flow is going to be significantly impaired. Some aren't even sure whether or not they'll regain the employees they had to let go. So they're faced with different issues at this point, and I don't even think that the conversations we've had haven't even centered around retrofitting so much as, what am I going to do? How am I going to do this? So to your point, I think it would be helpful, as a tool and as a resource for them to have something to help them on what they need to do to prepare their spaces. I know from the ones that I deal with, to use a harsh term, but it's appropriate. Desperation is where they're at right now, and trying to understand, what tomorrow will bring is more important to them than the plexiglass partitions. I don't even think some of them are thinking along those lines just yet. So we do need something to bring them into that category at some point in time.
Do you think that this comes, and this is a question kind of for everybody, and nobody has a crystal ball, but I've thought of this in chunks of time, right? So there was that immediate need. We're talking about 30 to 90 days. When do you have a sense that you'll really know what's going on? I know there's been some relief, and this could be for anybody, but there's been some relief from the federal government for some. And I know most of you have said April, most rent's been paid in April. May's looking maybe okay, but once you get to June, July, August, all bets are off. And I wonder, am I accurate? Because that's kind of what I've distilled from early conversations. So anybody can jump in on that.
We had a period of time where it seemed like, I think the anticipation was that they could open a lot sooner. Now that, it seems like the goalposts have been moved again, I think this is where it becomes a little dicier for them to write the check. So our March was fine. Our April was okay. May's weak. And in large part because they don't know, when they'll be able to open, if they'll be able to open. And I think that's the uncertainty of that is compounding the problem for May collections. And
most of your tenants, Al, are more of the traditional storefront.
The mom pops. Yep.
Yep. Andy Spatz has a lot of small office users in his space. Andy, can you unmute yourself and give us a brief summary? Are your office users able to pay? Have they been?
My office users, almost all of them have been able to pay. What I did was, once the loan program started, I was like the constant feeder. I sent everybody stuff, several times a day. Not that many people got money from, the Fed. I would say maybe one has money right now. And 3 have been approved, and I think a lot of that had to do with my users are small. A lot of that had to do with them dealing with larger banks, where they were just an account number. They weren't a person, and I directed a lot of them to other sources, and I really don't know if any of that has transpired. But right now, our rent has been the same for all of the months. The people that were behaving badly in February are still behaving badly. They're consistent, and I think what's going on right now will cause those people to become past tense in my life. So which would be okay. It's probably not a politically right thing to say, but I'm sorry.
That's okay. Hey, Stephen, can I call on you? Stephen Rogan, can I call on you for a quick minute? Just unmute yourself. Stephen owns two. He's looking like he's trying to unmute. Let me see if. Okay, he's still muted. So I don't. When he unmutes, I'll call on him again. Keep trying, man. I was going to ask him about his copycat tower in downtown Evanston, see how his office users are doing. So we'll come back to that. Who else wants to contribute to this this conversation? Jim Schummerhorn, are your tenants, your commercial tenants, are they hanging in there? I know you represent both ownership and landlords. I don't know if you want to contribute. I see you're on the call. Okay, so we'll skip that.
Eric Myers is here. I'll throw in a couple.
Thank you.
So I'm with Transwestern. I represent landlords downtown, various suburbs. I run the agency practice for Transwestern. And our client, FD Stonewater, owns 1007 Church Street, Evanston Metro Center. So one of the big factors that we see downtown are 1 million square foot towers, and the factors that we see all across the market. The number one concern of tenants and employers in the C-suite is safety. And safety is, I'm at home right now, I feel safe. My family feels safe. I know how to keep the family safe. I know what to do in these four walls. It's how safe am I going to feel? How safe are my employees going to feel, not only in my office building, but getting to that office building? And as we presented and set up the marketing for Evanston Metro Center, a big push of ours was Evanston is so keenly located between the North Shore submarket and downtown, where not only the CTA, but the Metro crosses right in and drops people off in both directions from those workplaces. So it's a perfect spot to grow a business because it's a happy medium in the middle. But I live in Lake Forest. My office is typically downtown. I do not want to get on a Metro car anytime this year with 65 other people twice a day. Go into a 1 million square foot building where there are either 4,000 people or, Willis Tower, 15,000 people. I'm going to have to drive to get there. And I think that falls back on Evanston again. A lot of people from the North Shore or from the close-in western suburbs, just to the immediate west, can drive to Evanston, as well as a few of my, our employees that live in downtown Chicago, or most likely northern part of Chicago, could drive or get there without having to take too much public transportation. So vacancy is an issue that my owner deals with. Evanston deals with occupancy. I will tell you, in any given property that we have, it's a mix, 50-50 mix. Some people have told their employees, you can come back whenever you feel comfortable, whether that's in January, July, or October. We're not going to force you to come back. We've kind of figured out how to work. Some are saying, we don't expect you to come back until January. In fact, I'm not going back to the office in January. That's the Googles, that's the Twitters, that's a lot of people. That's Capital One saying nobody has to go to any office. You can work out of your house for the rest of the year. What Evanston needs is occupancy so that the retailers, the businesses can function and profit from that. The one thing that I would brainstorm on is parking. How can you make parking free and accessible so that a lot of these people who have offices downtown could create a satellite office in Chicago where people could come and work, knowing that it's their car and maybe the stairs, not even an elevator, getting into their space. Because once you get into your office space, again, you can create that safe environment on your own because you're not leveraging off of what the landlord's doing or what the CTA is doing. So kind of my 2 cents.
So your thought is, how can Evanston provide either free or really cheap parking?
Promote and provide parking.
And by the way, I don't think most people know what Evanston Metro Center is. Can you describe that?
Yeah, it's an 8-story office building. 15,000 square foot floor plates. Building substantially leased. Northwestern or NUA Foods is our big tenants in the building. Pretty well leased, and we've had some pretty good luck in the last month or so too, signing up some tenants and perhaps grabbing a tenant from Morton Grove to come over here in the next week. So it's pure office building, no retail.
Yeah, this is the Helmut Jahn building that was Kent Swanson educated me on the history of that. Shan Moorhan, I believe, is the name of it.
Shan Moorhan Plaza, Wrigley Field, homage design. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I would just draft off that to say, as a community, both in terms of your work as well as our individual efforts, I think it could be time for Evanston from an office occupancy to go on the offensive and, put together a program for, doing exactly what was just outlined, which is, advertise all of those assets and ability to have a satellite office someone doesn't have to move 200,000 feet out of downtown, but we have a series of people open 5,000 feet, and that's meaningful.
Right. That all, Stephen, 1 second. And that also assumes that we can get chunks of office space open or available. I mean, we've gone through a phase where there wasn't a lot of contiguous space available for this. So, but who knows what's going to happen COVID, post-COVID, if more space will open up on the office side. Stephen, now that you've figured out the mute button, do you want to give a quick update on? You've got two challenges. You've got 2 vacant retail spaces that are pretty large, and then you have the office space at the Copycat building. What's your experience? And you're muted again, by the way. There we go.
Thanks. Most of my tenants have been paying in terms of the office users. My concern is with Starbucks going public today, that they're looking to renegotiate with all their landlords, that it's going to give a lot of small businesses out there the feeling that they too should be renegotiating. I mean, you got a major international company that is still very profitable, maybe not as profitable as they were. But, you had retail tenants that have been talking about it and not paying rent, and everybody expected that. But when you have a company like Starbucks that goes public with what they're doing, I think it's going to really cause a lot of smaller and bigger tenants to go, wait, if they're doing it, why am I not doing it? So I'm just concerned about what that may do. I'm not saying it will, but it could. Most of my tenants have all been paying on time. Even the vacancies have been paying on time. But I have gotten a couple of calls from people that have just kind of poked at the pig, so to speak. And my response has been, if you need it, then I'm willing to have a discussion. If you're asking, I'd prefer you to only ask when you need, because there's only a limited amount of opportunity to help people in need. And so, and none of them have followed up with a request for need. So I think there's a difference between asking and needing. And I think it's important as a landlord to try to distinguish that up front, because tenants talk to each other and word spreads fast. In terms of the retail vacancies, I did have one deal in particular that was in the works and got pulled because of what's been going on. I had a couple of other conversations that were going on, and they too hit pause. One of them said, I'm not sure what our business model will look like when this cleans itself up. And the other one just said, we're putting everything on hold till we figure out and allocating our capital to kind of what we've already got out there. And that's kind of the gist of it.
Thanks. That's good. Andy, just 1 second. I Kent hit his hand up, and I'll come to you next, Andy.
I just gonna add, I think what Lassiter was saying makes perfect sense. And, we did that in a slightly more formal way and just had a form that we asked if someone needed relief. We said, here, we need, what's your business plan? What's happened to your revenue situation? How are you going to get out of it? And, and kind of an ongoing kind of maintenance thing to kind of work with the tenant, but to do so with some formality. And I think that was it separated those who were just poking, as you noted, and but then people who really need it can get some help, and that we have some flexibility to do that. So that I concur with that completely.
Okay, thank you. Spats.
So I'm a real small vendor. We have 250,000 square feet. I've talked to everybody. So that's the way I've handled it, where I said, well, people asking for relief, and I say, well, I have to keep up the building. I have expenses to pay. I'm your landlord, not your lender. or a family member or your business partner. And I've gotten good results with that old school technique. What we should be discussing, though, is what are we going to do 2 years from now? Because until there's treatment and testing, we got nothing. So to worry about something that's going to happen in the middle of the summer or fall, we're jerking ourselves off. So I think what we should do is deal with reality.
Fair enough. And I'll have to explain to my children what that phrase meant. Thank you for that. I'm just kidding.
Sorry.
I'm just kidding. Okay, so and Andy, I think it's a good time. We've got, I hope we can hang out for another 20 minutes to a half an hour. But I wanted to see, because like I said it a few minutes ago, I'm trying to break this into chunks, right? We've got this immediate need. We're kind of transitioning into like the economic reopening or reemergence. And that's immediate. That's happening 60 days, 90 days. And then we get into this phase where we're in this mode, and again, no crystal ball, but we're wearing masks, the entire time. Get used to this. We've got a campaign that I sent a link to everybody, Recover Evanston, where we're trying to normalize the use of masks and social distancing, and that's going to be with us for some longer period of time. And what does that look like for our community, both as people are afraid to go to the office, to go to the stores, and as they kind of get used to it. But then also we know that there's going to be a spike in vacancies. Are we going to go from, are we going to have a 30-40% business failure? I don't know, but that a business failure equals a vacancy. And I talked about this with Albemonte. What does it look like 6 months from now? What does our city look like? What do our merchant districts look like? What does it look like when you have dark offices upstairs? And I don't mean that literally. What does it look like? But in some ways I do. What does a brown papered window look like when the sun's bleached it and it's peeling off? So we've got to come up with some strategies like that. But then also for landlords, how do we make sure that you're able to service debt? So that we can start that conversation today, but I feel like we need a subgroup, and I'd like to propose that we meet on a regular basis, and I'll come up with a plan after this call. But we need to have a small group of us on this phone meeting regularly to strategize about this. So what are some of your thoughts on that? I'll throw it out there. I said a lot, but it's also coming from a position of, passion, compassion, fear, all of it. So, Andy, I appreciate you kicking off that segment of our call.
Paul, I think, Stephen Rogan, I think there are a couple of different things, one of which you touched on, that this is an evolutionary process. It's not a linear process. And I think it's an evolutionary experience and process, not only for the landlords, because there are going to be different demands and different requirements, but it's also an evolutionary process for tenants and consumers. And so looking at it in that, 36 month, 8 month, 12 month, 18 month, all of that's going to evolve, and things will, if somebody would have told you would have been walking around with a mask 8 weeks ago, you probably wouldn't have felt comfortable. I know I didn't think it was going to be a reality, and I wasn't sure I was going to feel comfortable doing it. And now it is the reality, and it's part of my, I pick up my wallet, I pick up my mask and put it in my pocket or my coat. So I think it is an evolutionary process that people have to be, whatever that work group is, understands it is that, and then how to best build as consumers, landlords, and retailers and or office users evolve themselves.
I think it's social Darwinism time. I think people are going to fall out. I just, I have no idea how you're going to save people unless there's a source of funds. And, all the stuff so far has given money to about 9% of small business owners. That's not going to do too much. So, I'm optimistic about the whole thing, but short term, there's going to be blood. And I think because, cash flow in businesses are going to get reduced. The buildings are going to be making less money. The property values are going to go down, and that's going to change things. That's going to change things too. So, my focus, and I'll stop talking about this. My focus is how do I keep my patient stable? And the way I keep my patients stable is what I was talking about earlier, which is, expanding the uses that would work in my properties without having to screw around 6 months and getting a zoning variation or a special use or anything else you want to call it.
Andy, give us an example while the mayor's on the phone. Give a specific example of what you would need.
Well, I've sort of planned for this previously, sort of accidentally, which is almost every one of my properties has each unit has a storefront kind of entry. So that takes that stress, out of the thing. And like everybody's saying, people have to feel comfortable. Well, nobody's going to feel comfortable until there's treatment and testing, and I can't do that. I'm not a scientist. So I think what we need to do is talk about ways to make Evanston the go-to place for people to invest money because they know that we're easy to work with. And all that's going to put money in the city's pocket. And if we're smart, we won't have to spend any of the city's budget to accomplish this.
Right, but you were saying specifically like code changes.
Okay. Thanks. Text amendments. It's real easy to do. We did text amendments when we back in 2006 with our LOVA when there was MU and MUE, and we created the MXE, which was sort of a mishmash. And basically, that zoning designation is the Wild West. You can do virtually anything you damn well please. And I think that's what we need. Let the free market do its thing, and save our asses. Because if we screw around talking for a year, we're going to miss the boat. And I don't think we should talk for a year. Obviously, we have to talk, but I think we need to be aggressive.
Okay.
Paul, something that I would add to that.
Yeah.
I think I often hear from people when you mention Evanston, it's a long process and it's an expensive process because of, again, it's the process and it's a legitimate process. I'm not questioning a lot of that stuff, but time is money for somebody that's holding a mortgage or paying for plans. And there's a common feeling among people internally and externally when you talk about Evanston, it costs a lot more because of the process to get from point A to point B to start whatever it is you're doing. And so if there are ways that the city can look at those processes, given the unique circumstance, because every month is a lot of money for people, whether it's a storefront that's looking to get a sign approved, or it's a developer that's looking to put up 300 apartment units. Time is money, and now money is even more scarce and more critical than ever. So as people come in for whatever it is, I think it's anything the city can do to expedite, to give direction, but concrete direction. Not, yeah, we'd like to see this, and then you come back and you can't get through where you have to go because now somebody else has a different point. So the more upfront leadership and direction that people can get, it's concrete, that they can pardon the pun, go to the bank with, the better it's going to be for everybody to get through this situation together.
Okay, thanks.
What
Ken?
Well, I want to say one more thing, please. What I'm proposing is we don't have to involve the city. What we're doing, and that's not meant in a negative way. It's in the book. If you read the book, the permitted uses are there. If you have a gumption, you go for a special use, but you expand exponentially what you can do by right. I've done one project in the city that I needed a papal dispensation for, and it took me 6 or 7 months to get a in-house variation. It was a real pain in the behind. Everybody did their job, but it just took forever.
Yeah. Duly noted, Kent, and then there's an individual on the call with the initials SC who wanted to say something. And when Kent is finished, just unmute yourself and go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm going to combine. One thing that Eric mentioned is there's an opportunity to kind of do a satellite office. There's going to be some office demand that's incremental and unique, but that has to be hit very quickly because it's going to be here for 18, 24 months, and then vaccines or other things may change behavior again. So that's where I think you need sort of this fast track approvals of certain office permits or other things to get things going in some of the existing office spaces and kind of make that so Evanston can take advantage of this market opportunity, because I can tell you every major user is going to be looking at having to have some satellite options, and it's important, and you have a big opportunity to do that, but you got to have a very easy, fast process to get it done.
Kent, do you think that there's an opportunity for my office, the mayor, maybe some others, to convene brokers or somehow connect with that world of office experts who will be able to quickly identify those that want to do satellite offices so we can make it happen? Like, I think that's maybe something we can add to our smaller group list. Like, how do we?
I would suggest that, and maybe further, there's just outreach to major downtown companies to see if they, want to put 10,000 feet, but it's also talking to Bill and, Lee Golub, and what have you got? Because that instant occupancy in the office side is pretty good. I think that where the big challenge is going to be, retail was already having challenges, and you layer this on top of it. It is exceedingly, difficult. And that's where I think a lot of the blood's going to be. It's certainly that way in the payment. We're getting very good payment on the office side, but on the retail side, it's been vastly worse performance, locally and nationally.
Okay, I want to call on Al Belmonte again, but is SC?
Yeah, Paul Sean Chinsky.
Hey, Sean.
So yeah, actually, I'm calling out on the phone, and apparently when you're on the phone, you got to press *6 to unmute. It doesn't work on the screen, but in listening to the conversation, so I guess to give you my perspective, the people that don't know me, so I own goods, and I run, I run the store, but I also have 2 retail tenants, and I don't know that the sentiment amongst small retailers is really understood amongst property owners. So what I did for my tenants is I told them in March that they didn't have to pay for April in May, that they would pay. We'd add it on to the end of the lease. Because I knew it was going to take a while for us to reopen, and even when we reopen, we're not going to get up to full capacity for a long time. I think that it's going to be 6 months or a year before we really understand the shakeout for small retailers. The programs that have been offered to us do very little to actually support the business. The Paycheck Protection Program is not the payer; it's the person receiving the check, and a lot of people didn't get it. I won't take you guys through my whole tale of woe about trying to get financing for my business, but it's pretty much useless. And then another point I want to add, Steve, you had said at the beginning about nobody's going to be made whole. Nobody wants to be made whole. That isn't the ask. The ask is we want to be treated fairly, and the impact of this is disparate in that some of us are completely out of business, and others are still conducting business. And so your ground floor retailers are frankly pissed off. And I get that everybody. So I as a property owner, I do want to get my rent, but my concern isn't getting the rent the next 3 months. My concern is 6 months from now or a year, I'm looking out at empty storefronts, and I'm in a position where whoever's going to be interested in the space is going to have a lot of leverage over me. So, I think you need to preserve your tenants and make that a priority. If you have the means to help them, it's important to do so, because I can tell you that if you run a retail business and your sales are down, say 15%, you're probably not going to have a profitable year, and people are going to be down 50% or more, because even when we open, by force of law, we're not going to be able to be at full capacity. And so I feel like the impact this is going to have on small retailers isn't truly appreciated. And so that's a thought that I wanted to share.
Sean, this is Steve Haggerty. Thank you for sharing that. I think that sentiment that you shared, and Paul, chime in if you think differently, but I think that sentiment that you shared was shared with us earlier this week when we were on a call with the retailers. And we're talking small local kind of retailers, very much sort of conveyed that. And so I really appreciate what you've done, but other landlords have talked about the same thing in terms of, if people come, Kent mentioned this, we're trying to work with them, because again, it is this fragile ecosystem, and, we want to try to keep it in balance till we get out of this thing. So we have something to build upon and not find ourselves with just a desolate town.
Yeah, and so just to reiterate my point, because I didn't mean to just rant about the problems of my retail business, but I talk to everybody else on the block, and I have a sense of how scared people are that they're not going to survive this. And if you can't, I let my tenants go without paying rent because I needed them to keep their staff, because that's more important for the long-term health of their business. The building's not going to go anywhere, and I can make it up later if they survive. If they don't survive, I'm going to lose more with a vacancy than I am a couple months of giving them a concession. So I guess my point is to plead to the others to understand if you have tenants, especially if they have not been open for business, it's probably pretty dire for them.
Sean,
Do you have a mortgage on your building?
Pardon?
Do you have a mortgage on your building?
I don't. No.
That says a lot. That's why you're able to be as magnanimous as you are, which is great.
I'm familiar with how finances work, and in a couple months, if your mortgage is such that you can't, when you have a vacancy, you go without getting rent, and it doesn't put you out of business. So if I was a tenant and that was what my landlord came to me with, I would find it hard to believe they are so leveraged that they can't make a concession, at least, to work out a plan.
So
Sean, it's a fine balancing act. I think every landlord would love to be in a position that you are with no mortgage. But let me I think you are 100% correct in advocating for what you are. And here's why I think it is 100% correct. Because as a landlord, if I'm not protecting my tenants, let me tell you something. It's incredibly more expensive to replace a tenant than it is to work with a tenant. So the reality is, if a tenant leaves today, there's really nobody there to backfill it. And I'm going to have to pay commissions. I'm going to have to pay TI. I'm going to have to give free rent. There are a whole host of things that it's going to cost me including being vacant, as you said. So I think good landlords hopefully understand that there's really nobody to backfill after the mom and pop or even the national retailers. They're not rolling out new stores right now. You know, they're not banging down doors of landlords with vacant space to say, hey, I want to come in and strike a deal. So to your point, it is absolutely in the landlord's best interest to work with and advocate to figure out how they can move forward.
Oh, thanks.
Thanks, Stephen. Sean, thanks for bringing that up. We're at the hour. I want to respect everybody's calendar. We've been at this for an hour. I think there's a lot more work that we have to do as a team, and it looks like the mayor needs to jump off the call. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for being on the call.
Thank you, Paul.
Appreciate
Thank you, everybody, for gathering. It was really good to be on here with you and listen.
Yeah, we're gonna do at least one more follow up to this, Steve. So we'll invite you to that. So something I wanted to just bring up quickly before, and we can still talk a little bit longer if you have time, but something I talked about with El Belmonte right after this started was what does downtown or Main Street or Dempster or any of these streets look like 6 to 9 months from now? And what is the future of retail? What is the future of merchant districts? Are people going to be shopping the same way? Are there any places that exist anymore? Is Amazon taking over? Do we need to change our codes to allow for other uses on ground floor, right? So those are the types of things that as a futurist, I'm interested in talking about. And maybe as we gather together on a more regular basis over the next 90 days or so, what are ways that we can keep our districts vibrant, but also not maintain this assumption that's really kind of a turn in the 19th century, where people were shopping in department stores or other kinds of storefront retail. So I want to just kind of spark that conversation, not necessarily for today, but for future calls and thinking about what our districts look like if they're not retail at the base. I'm really concerned that, we had this challenge before COVID, right? The retailers were fading away. So I want to think about that. What did we miss today that we should have on a future conversation? I heard a lot about regulation, and we'll work on that. I want to work on tenant retrofit program. There's some things we're working on behind the scenes on that. Taxation, I know the reassessment was causing a lot of heartburn, and I'm not sure we're monitoring that. I don't know how the assessor is going to make adjustments for that. There was talk recently that they were going to do some kind of virtual reassessment for Evanston, since they've already done the actual assessment. I don't know. I don't have enough details on that. Maybe you know more than I do. So that's kind of it. Those are my top of mind thoughts. I don't know if there's anything else anybody wants to add for future calls. I think Annie suggested that we perhaps break into district specific calls. If you're, I don't know, I'm looking, everybody kind of has properties in multiple districts, but maybe we do downtown landlords versus Main Street landlords versus Central Street. So we'll come up with a game plan, but I really appreciate your input, and it's good to see a lot of your faces. We used to work a lot together, and I just think we need to continue to have the conversation. I think maybe check in 30 days, if that makes sense. I don't think it makes any sense to regroup in 2 weeks. What are your thoughts? Any input on that? You good with that? Okay. And then again, Annie was suggesting that we get somebody from the county. So one thing we can do is you can communicate back with me through normal channels. We all stay connected as it is. So either text or call me, and we can talk about things that we want to add to future calls. But it's, from my perspective, if you have the ability to help us, we really need the help. And We've opened the door. We have the bully pulpit. We meet twice a week with legislators, both representatives of the state and federal level. I think there's a county person. So there's a lot of advocacy in ways that we can communicate with the decision makers. But I'm not going to pretend that we have all the answers. So that's why we're having these calls. Catherine, you have anything to add from your perspective? Roger, anybody?
No, good. Excellent to hear from people and food for thought for how we can move forward. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks. Andy, I promise you will address some of these. You know, I heard the mayor. There's definitely opportunities here. This idea of reducing regulation so we can quickly, backfill space for satellite uses is. I think that's the motivator. I think that's when let's get to work on that. Kind of my first thing I want to take a look at. So, all right, I'm gonna hang up unless there's any other suggestions or comments. Thanks everybody for contributing.
Can I say one thing?
Yeah.
The county, I don't understand them. They make this big brouhaha, and what are they going to do? They're going to let you pay 2 months late.
Yeah.
That's where their head is. They didn't get it when they did all the tax stuff over a year ago. They still don't get it. And for the life of me, I don't understand, Mr. Kagi.
All right. That's something we'll discuss. I don't know how to respond to that, but I hear you.
Hey, Paul, Sean, can I make one more point, just kind of on that with the county? If people aren't aggravated enough with the county, something that I learned recently. So, Amazon opened up a distribution center in Skokie, and the county has given them a 60% discount on their property taxes as an incentive to use the space. It's something I think it's called a 6C or C6, which is given to the property before the tenant. But the county, we're sort of getting it on both ends from the county. We're getting a tax increase, and then if you're a retailer, the whole reason Amazon set up that warehouse is for the last mile delivery. It's so that they can get things to the customers quick enough that they're an alternative to actually going to the store. And the county's giving them, I don't know how to quantify it because I don't think their tax bill has shown up, but things like this need to be pointed out and addressed, because it's kind of hard to rationalize owning a business when the taxes I'm paying are subsidizing the competitor that's decimating. So I'd be really curious to hear what the county has to say about that, because anybody that owns ground floor retail is going to be impacted by that.
Hey, Sean, I heard that. I'll make sure Paul hears it too.
Thanks, Sean.